seminar will be recorded, and then once Monica's presentation ends, then we'll open the floor up to questions, discussions, points of clarification, whatever you'd like to have in this discussion. But at that point, the recording will stop, just so everyone feels comfortable sharing what they want, or asking any questions. The whole point of this is to inform the project and have a discussion about this material. So we don't want anyone to feel pressured or like there's any consequences for them saying anything. So we'll have we'll have that recorded. So my name is Lenora Callahan. I work with Professor Bryony Hoskins, who's the PI for the GEPIC project in the UK at the University of Roehampton at the School of Sustainability and Responsible Management. And we are hosting this new online seminar series for the GEPIC project. GEPIC, for those who may not know, stands for Gender Empowerment Through Politics in the Classroom. And what we basically are doing is we're doing a sort of a multinational or transnational research project that's run out of 6 different countries: ourselves, Belgium, Czechia, Denmark, Spain, and Germany, in the UK, obviously. And what we're doing is we're doing a multi-phase research project that's looking at ways to improve political self-efficacy of girls that are facing multiple disadvantages. So we are looking at socioeconomic disadvantages, we're looking at ethnicity, minoritized ethnic group, minoritized or religious groups, and other factors that may be intersectional factors that are causing disparities or inequalities in their political self-efficacy or their confidence in their voice and to organize themselves politically and to speak up in the class. And so the idea of the project is to first get an understanding of what's happening in the classrooms to see if there's different dynamics taking place that can be addressed to help support these girls in their political self-efficacy. And from there, the next stage, we are doing quasi-experiments or essentially trials of different methods to see if they are if they're going to help girls with their political self-efficacy. And then after we get information from the observations and the trials, we're going to co-construct a pilot in each country, which essentially is an intervention, right? We're going to try out an intervention that the teachers develop themselves, and they co-construct this intervention over like in-person workshops, and the feedback from the intervention they come up with, we then get feedback from a student group that's related to them as well to see to get their opinions on the project or the intervention, to see if it makes sense to them, if it's something that they understand and would want to take part in. And from there, there's also feedback from advisory boards that we have in each country and then internationally. So there's many stages to this project, but the whole idea is to figure out ways to bolster girls' political self-efficacy in the classrooms, with like a teacher-led initiative. And then the ultimate goal is to create a toolkit to get into the hands of teachers to implement this. And so today we have a fantastic speaker in our online seminar series. Our online seminar series has been trialed this summer. We're still trialing it and we're still running the sessions and it's going so well. We're excited. We're going to continue these in the autumn and we'll come out with our autumn schedule in the next couple of months so everyone knows ahead of time what to expect and when to expect to be online. The idea of these seminars is to have discussions about the subject matter to help inform the project and to help us progress in the project in a way that's informed by all the experts that we can get involved. So today we have Mónica Ferrín Pereira. I hope I said your name correctly. It's a beautiful name. And we're going to have, she's going to give us a wonderful talk about political interest. And she wrote a paper, wrote a paper called Political Interest Revisited. And today we're saying it's expanded because she'll talk about some new evidence that she has. So I'd like everyone to say hello to Mónica.
Hello, everyone. I don't know if I can share my presentation. Yeah, it's allowed. Can you see it?
Yep,
Yeah.
we can see it.
Okay. So thanks so much. Thanks very much for the invitation to this very friendly seminar, I would say, which I always like. I'm very enthusiastic about your project. I think this is one of the big challenges we need to face for all of us who are trying to deal with these gaps in society. So I'm very much willing to know more about what you will be doing in the following years, and good luck with everything. So I have been told to tell you a bit about political interest. So what I will be doing is basically to tell you about some pieces of evidence we have collected so far. So Gemma here has been writing this with me. She deserves the merit as I do. So you have the real expert in the room, in the project. And today, I'll basically tell you a bit how we did it to face this gender gaps in political interest through these two different studies. So just to contextualize it a bit, where we start from, this is the picture we traditionally have. This is how we measure political interest in surveys, and this is the standard question on how interested are you in politics. You see that there's a large gap in all countries, and men are systematically more interested in politics than women are. So this is the point of departure, really, from what we do in GenPol. So based on this, we try to understand, well, why? Is there something behind this indicator that makes women be systematically less interested in politics than men? And this is where our first study starts, really. The first thing we try to assess in this study is whether there are gender notions of politics that explain these gaps. That is, whether girls and boys basically learn something different in relation to politics, and whether this makes them be less interested in politics than men when they are adults. Since this is the standard indicator, how interested in politics is the standard indicators that has been used for ages in most surveys, and this is where we find the biggest gap traditionally in political implication between adult population. What we try to do is to observe by means of surveys, and this is where the gap emerges, where we can see by means of surveys whether this is indeed there is indeed a gender notion of politics. So we conducted an online survey in Spain, and we adopted the following strategy. So first, we try to understand what politics is for men and for women. So we asked people, well, this is a list of 19 topics. What is politics for you and what is not politics for you? And the respondents were simply asked to pick whatever they consider was political and whatever they did not consider was political. Our intention was, well, if there's a gender notion of politics, women will take some topics and men will take some others. The question that followed this one is whether there was an interest in these different politics, in order to understand whether indeed men and women are interested in different topics, and the topics that are more interesting for men are those that are classically politics, whereas those that are more interesting for women are not politics in the population's mind. The third item we posed in the survey is whether they miss an important political topic, in case we were missing something important, because we didn't think of it, or there's something missing in the socialization process that we're not capturing with all these 19 topics. So what we tried to do in the online survey was basically to put ourselves in the respondents' minds and try to understand what they were answering when they are asked this political interest question. So I'll briefly present you some of the results of this research. So this is the answer to the first question, the 19 topics, and whether this is politics for men and for women. You see, there's not a huge difference between women and men when they're asked whether a topic is political or not. Yes, in the extremes, there's a few topics that are a bit different. It's the gender pickup for women and the school subjects for men. So men are saying that school subjects are more political than women, and women are saying that the gender pickup is more political than men. But on average, there's quite a lot of similarity between what women and men think is political. So what does it mean? Our thought is that this really reflects what they think of when they are asking surveys, how interested are you in politics? So it's not that women and men think of what is more interesting for them or what they think is politics for them, but this is kind of a common notion of what is political for women and for men. And this is what drives their answer to the political interest items. The picture looks quite different when you ask them whether they are interested in these topics or not. Here you see that there are many more differences between the topics that are considered more interesting by men and the topics that are considered more interesting by women. So the salary of politicians, social equality, the environment, religion, etc., topics that men consider more interesting than women, and gender pickup, gender-based violence, abortion, and the price of medicines are topics that are considered more interesting for women than for men. And here we can start to see the difference, the socialization we have in society of women and men. So men consider topics that are more classic politics, to say, like politicians. This is the first thing you think of when you're asked about politics. This is more interesting for men, but it is not for women. Whereas other aspects which tend to be considered not political, such as the gender pickup or the gender-based violence, abortion, are the topics that are more interesting for women than for men. So we clearly start to see a difference between what drives women's and men's political interests, and maybe this is the source of why women systematically appear as less interested in politics than men. If we follow up on these questions and we really, well, what was missing in there? What do you think is really missing in this list of 19 topics that we did not address? The differences are reinforced. And we again clearly see that men are most interested or consider that politics is really the classic notion, that politicians, the elections, the institutions, what is most visible, or what has been called like hard politics, where social politics instead is what matters most for women. So we again see that for women and men, they do share a common notion of politics when we ask them in the abstract, but this notion of politics is what is politics for men, basically, or what is more interesting for men and not for women. So when they are answering this classic indicator, how interested are you in politics, what they are assessing is their level of interest for all these politicians, elections, institutions, etc., which is not what is most interesting for women. And this is why, and this is maybe the most interesting part of it, when we regress all these different interests of women and men in a regression model, the gender gap disappears, which is an indication that this indicator of political interest, this item of political interest, represents best the interest of men and not of women. And this is why we tend to find this big gender gap in levels of political interest. So this was for the first study. And now the expansion of this first study, because we were really interested in understanding what comes to people's minds when asked about this standard indicator of political interest. and to assess a bit whether it is valid to measure what we really aim at measuring, which is interest or implication in the political world. So in this second study, what we try to do is to address it a bit more qualitatively, or from a more qualitative perspective, and assess this validity of this indicator through a mixed methods approach. In stage 1, we do cognitive interviews, online cognitive interviews, which allows us to have a bit broader sample that we would normally have if this was face-to-face, but we try to employ the same method as is normally done face-to-face. Cognitive interviews make people talk about how they understand the question you just posed to them in a survey. So you have a deep understanding of what they have thought of when they were answering to this question, what topics came to their minds, etc., etc. And in second stage, we run a survey experiment building on the findings of the cognitive interviews. So for the cognitive interviews, this is basically the design we employed. We asked respondents the classic question on interest in politics, and we addressed them all these follow-up questions. What came to your mind? What was the meaning of politics? What topics did you think of when you were answering to the political interest question? Please recall the answer to you gave to this question and tell us what drove the answer. And we analyze the answers to these follow-up questions from a qualitative perspective. What we got, first, of course, through a coding scheme, when we try first to distinguish between different dimensions in this analysis, the cognitive dimension, that is the topics that came to people's minds when they were answering to the political interest question, the affective dimension, so what they felt. Were they angry when they were asked about this question? Were they happy? What was the sentiment that came to their minds? And then the coherence, which was aimed basically at understanding whether the answer they gave in the scale from 1 to 4 was coherent to what they were telling to us in relation to the cognitive or the affective dimension or other components of their discourse. So we use this coding scheme to interpret the findings from the cognitive interview. And the results, as you can see, is that there are many different topics people think of when they are asked about this classic question. But again, as we found in the previous studies, so politicians, parties, elections are the winners. So it's most of what comes to people's minds when they are asked these standard questions of political interest are related to what we understand as classic politics, which again introduces a bias, as we just saw in a moment ago, in relation to gender. The other interesting aspect we found out with this study is that most of the affective feelings that come to people's minds when they are asked this question are negative. But they are negative especially for people who have low levels of political interest. So what it appears with this finding is that political interest seems to be valid mainly for people with high interest in political, but not as much for people with low political interest, who since for this group of people, it seems to reflect something else that is not truly interest, but their affection towards politics, which might be related, but it's not the same construct. We also find, and sorry, this is in Spanish, I didn't have time to translate it, that even if, of course, this is not a representative sample, women tend to be much less positive about this item than men. Even if both women and men are highly negative, you can see again a difference between women and men in the affections that are promoted by when this standard indicator of political interest. So these were mainly the main findings of the cognitive interview, which we used to frame the online survey experiment. And here what we played around, since this was the most important finding on the affective dimension and how this affective dimension drives people's answers on this classic indicator, is to try to understand whether we can move people's levels of interest, so make them higher or lower, depending on whether we frame them in positive or negative. So what you see is the design of the online survey experiment with 5 different groups, a control group, and 4 other groups where the frame is positive. In group B, importance, and E, influence, or negative in group C and group D, where we introduce malaise and conflict. This was the first question we posed to respondents with this positive or negative frame, and immediately after we ask about their levels of interest in politics. And again, we wanted to understand whether framing politics in a way that is positive or negative has an impact on their levels of political interest. As you can see in this figure, there's not much of it except for the negative frame, which is maybe something we wouldn't expect. So if you frame it as negative, why would people increase their levels of political interest if politics is associated to something negative? Well, the answer comes a bit late, and I don't have the graphs. Sorry, I can show it later if you want it. The answer is that apparently, if I would have shown the figure, sorry, I forgot. Apparently, levels of political interest increase only for the people who are really positive about politics, and if it's in contradiction with the frame. So if people have positive predispositions towards politics and are framed in negative terms, this boosts their levels of interests, but only for those people. So this is really what you're seeing. So that's predispositions on what we learn is really what matters in this affective dimension of political interest. So as a summary of both studies, they tend to confirm that the standard indicator of political interest presents biases, gender biases in the first study, a bit in the second study as well, but in the second study we show also that this indicator is strongly effectively biased towards either positive or negative, and it does not fully reflect people's levels of implication in politics, but rather whether they think it is a good thing or a bad thing. The important thing, I guess, for your project is the importance of learning. Either the gender or the affective bias rely on what we learn on our predispositions throughout early childhood and later on. And this is what really frames or what really drives the answers of the respondents, either in terms of this gender bias or also in terms of considering that politics is not worth. I'm finishing. This is just to tell you where the sources of what I've just presented are. This 2 articles, the second one hopefully forthcoming with Tema, and our project where you can find more information on what we try to do now, more focused on the local level. So thank you so much for your attention and happy to answer any question. I hope I was clear enough. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Monica. That was really enlightening. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure if my thing came up. Thank you so much for that. Gosh, yeah, there's a lot in there. And there's some my first sort of reaction to it is that there's a it's kind of a fine there's kind of these fine distinctions that I think that are going to be really helpful for us to think through when we're looking at sort of their predispositions, right? Um, and so yeah, so I want to think more about how to pick those out. But Bryony has her hand up, so can you go for it, Bryony?
Thank you. It's a really interesting and helpful presentation. So thank you very much for that. What I was interested in is, 'cause I read already your work on the political interest, and I'm following this up in